Hello and welcome back to Doing Death with your host, Jan. Contrary to popular wisdom that death is a taboo subject, which must be off the table for discussion, as someone who works in the funeral industry and encounters the dead on a regular basis, I found that people are often fascinated by the job that I do and tend to be inquisitive and ask questions about why I do it. Now, not to come across weird or anything, but death work and the many processes associated with it has fascinated me for as long as I can remember. My favourite shows are about those such as anatomy, pathology and surgical procedures, and anything remotely related to the process of ageing, death and how we grieve. There's also been a few good comedy series about the topic as well, and Netflix did a good one called The Afterlife, in which Ricky Gervais appeared. I go for walks in graveyards and cemeteries, where I feel inspired by the many stories to be found on the inscriptions, and I feel at total peace in these environments. During much of my life, I've been immersed in all matters death in one way, shape or form, and have felt able to confront these large questions about death and dying. I'm not unique, I don't think. Many of the families, for example, whom I work with, show a genuine interest in and an appreciation for the job that I do. They want to know the gory ins and outs, whether I'm frightened of being at such close quarters to the dead, and what on earth led me to a vacation in the funeral industry. No, I'm not scared. It's the living we need to worry about. The dead can't hurt you, is the response I usually give, which elicits a knowing chuckle and an instant recognition of the truth. That is, after someone has passed away, they no longer are able to impact our lives in the way they did. My response offers everyone in the room, in fact, a chance to reflect on the impact that living humans have on each other and the finality and irreversible nature of death. Others want to know more about what their loved one will look like. It's not uncommon for families to inquire whether they will look different after death. I respond openly and factually, but with care and compassion. That yes, with the passing of time, the human body undertakes various changes which will mean that they look quite different to when they were last seen. I don't go into the detail unless I'm asked a specific question, otherwise this might be too traumatic. There's a duty of care not to cause harm, obviously, and there's a fine line, a fine balance actually to be drawn between ensuring families are informed and causing unwarranted distress. Sometimes a deceased has experienced a long and drawn out illness and has been taking lots of medication prior to death. This may change their appearance. Or if the deceased has been in hospital for an extended period of time, pending a post-mortem because the cause of death can't be established, it will normally not be appropriate for families to have an open coffin chapel visit. These are just two of the instances where it can be particularly distressing for families, and these discussions are difficult. Now, we'll pick up on this subject in future podcasts. Where chapel visits are going ahead, it's not uncommon for requests to paint fingernails in a favourite colour or to apply lipstick. I may also need to remove from or place items onto the deceased, such as jewellery, photos and cards. And depending on the cultural background of the person, other religious symbols and icons may be requested to be placed in the hands of the deceased, as well as on the coffin itself. But for all chapel visits, I am required to ensure that the deceased presents well. This may include applying makeup to disguise discoloration on the face, brushing their hair, repositioning their arms and hands, and adjusting their head if it's not straight, as well as, of course, ensuring that the chapel is clean and tidy. I'll always set my clients' expectations from the very moment I meet with them and keep them informed of any unforeseen scenarios or changes to the funeral arrangements. If there's something that we can no longer achieve due to matters beyond my control or something outside the scope of what we do provide, it's important for me to be upfront as to the reasons, giving the client adequate time to digest the information and ask additional questions if need be. My role is to reassure the family that whilst their loved one is in my care, their dignity and respect will be honoured and is my number one priority, so that families can say their final goodbyes in a way which is fitting to their wants and needs. A family-facing role as a funeral professional isn't for the faint-hearted. Death work, as I call it, something that people typically don't set out to do or ever want to do. An ongoing interaction with the family may last up to a month and beyond. And the deceased care for the deceased requires a robust and vigilant nature, and to be able to support the individuals who are mourning and who are at the initial stages of their grief journey. It's an extraordinary privilege to look after those who have experienced a loss and to be in a position of trust as a custodian of the deceased. High levels of compassion are obviously required. During a bereavement, it's accepted that we're not ourselves, with varying states of mental alertness or the ability to cope with what's going on. So even completing a simple form or instruction may present challenges for the family. It's important to be clear and concise and regularly check back for comprehension so as to not add confusion and distress. So patience in abundance is to properly assist a family in completing the various legal documents, cremation and burial application paperwork, and generally be on hand to chase updates with the GP, the hospital, or the coroner, while going at a pace which is appropriate to the client's individual need. As a funeral professional, I absorb high levels of other people's stress, depression, anger sometimes, and confusion. So not having a means to offload this trauma by channeling positive self-care can lead to stress on my part, to emotional exhaustion and inevitable sickness. So it's really important to take good care, both mentally and physically, and to find time to have a good old belly laugh, which I love to do, as regularly as possible. I offload and refill by engaging in exercise and meditation, and by watching comedy and going for walks. Well, there's a brief insight into what I do as a funeral professional. I look death square in the face every day, and the topic of death and loss is never off the agenda. And to be honest, I find this neither frightening or morbid. Instead, it's a positive and awakening aspect of my daily reality, as my role provides a constant reminder of how precious life really is. I'm encouraged actually by the fact that individuals are so loved and sought to be remembered well, and that it's important for us to lead a full and happy life. For many of us working in arenas relating to death, dying and dead bodies, much of the above will ring true, much of what I've said will ring true. But there's also a wider focus on what we do, and that's helping individuals to engage with death in a more active, open and productive way. You see, death has become so distant that it terrifies us, and the best we can do often is to manage an overwhelming sense of fear. I find it astounding that most people don't at least think more regularly about death. Far from being taboo, death, due to social media, has become increasingly in our faces. We're exposed to images of death on the news and in films, which means, as I said last week, that we can't really avoid knowing it happens. Death isn't taboo, it's more that we're not encouraged to talk about it openly. We've fallen out of practice when it comes to the everydayness of death and dead bodies, something that our Victorian cousins knew all too well with their high mortality rates. And facing up to the reality of death couldn't be repressed back then like it is today. Thankfully, though, due to vastly improved healthcare, we're living much longer lives. But this privilege and longevity has meant that we're disconnected from concepts of death and completely unprepared for when it happens. Here at Doing Death, I want to encourage us to talk more openly about death and to ask questions so we can increase our confidence about this topic. So here's a challenge for you. Today, and for the remainder of your days perhaps, ask someone a question about death and dying and encourage them to do the same. Just a reminder before I go, talking about this subject, death and dying, is a meditation not only on dying, of course, but on life itself. Thank you for listening, and until next time, take care and live well.